When my parents insisted I hire my cousin, they didn't tell me he had a hidden plan to take over my business and then I never thought I'd be the guy to mix family and business. My dad, Robert, always told me it was a bad idea. Yet here he was, sitting across from me, practically begging me to hire my cousin, Aiden. Caleb, my mom, Sharon, chimed in. Aiden's been through a lot. He just needs a chance to get back on his feet. You've got the resources, honey. Mom, I sighed, trying to keep my voice calm. Running a tech startup isn't charity work. It's hard enough as it is without bringing in someone with no experience. But he's family, she pressed, her tone taking on that pleading edge I knew too well. And he's smart. You grew up with him. You know how sharp he is. He just hasn't had your opportunities. I wanted to push back, but their expressions made me pause. My dad looked unusually serious, and my mom was doing her best to play the guilt card. I hadn't seen Aiden in years, not since he'd skipped out on college to figure himself out. Last I heard, he'd been bouncing between odd jobs, barely scraping by. I couldn't shake the memory of him as the cocky, overconfident kid who always seemed to land on his feet, no matter how reckless he acted. Against my better judgment, I caved. Fine, I muttered. I'll bring him in on a trial basis. 3 months. If he screws up, he's out. Aiden showed up the next Monday, all smiles and charm. He was a little taller than I remembered, lean but wiry, with sharp features and an easy confidence that put people at ease. Caleb, he greeted me like we were best friends. Man, thanks for giving me this shot.
I swear, I won't let you down.
I plastered on a smile and shook his hand. Good to see you, Aiden. Let's see how you fit in. I introduced him to the team during the morning meeting. My employees were skeptical, as I'd expected, but polite enough. Grace, one of my sharpest developers, gave me a subtle raised eyebrow when I mentioned that Aiden would be shadowing me to learn the ropes. Lucas, my business partner, seemed indifferent, though he muttered something about how nepotism always bites you in the ass when Aiden wasn't around. To his credit, Aiden threw himself into the work. He asked a lot of questions, some of which were surprisingly insightful. At first, I wondered if I'd been too hard on him in my head. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe he just needed a break. But then little things started to gnaw at me. A week in, I noticed how quickly Aiden was befriending the team. He'd linger in the break room, cracking jokes and laughing with my employees like he'd been part of the crew for years. He was charming, I'd give him that, but there was something performative about it that rubbed me the wrong way. Then came the suggestions. Hey, Caleb, he said one afternoon, leaning casually against the doorframe of my office. I've been talking to Grace about her workflow. She's got some great ideas for streamlining the QA process. You should let her take the lead on it. I frowned. Grace hasn't mentioned that to me. She's probably just shy about pitching it to the boss, he replied smoothly. But trust me, I think it'd be worth exploring. I shrugged it off, but it wasn't the last time Aiden helpfully passed along ideas that weren't his. By the second week, he was holding impromptu chats with the team, throwing out suggestions like he'd been here for years. Lucas caught my eye during one of these moments and gave me a knowing look. What's his deal? Lucas asked me after Aiden had left the room. I don't know, I admitted. He's eager, but it's starting to feel like he's overstepping. Lucas nodded. Be careful, Caleb. I've seen guys like him before. They act like they're helping, but they've always got an angle. The turning point came at the end of Aiden's 3rd week. I was going over quarterly reports late one night when I noticed a discrepancy in the employee access logs. Aiden's name was on the system far more than it should have been for someone in his position. He'd accessed files and meeting notes that had nothing to do with his role. I called him into my office the next morning. Aiden, can you explain why you've been poking around in files that aren't part of your training? His face didn't betray a flicker of guilt. Oh, that? I was just trying to get a better understanding of the company, Caleb. If I'm going to contribute, I need to know how things work at every level. Isn't that what you want? It was a good excuse, too good. Still, something about his nonchalance set me on edge. Stay out of the files unless I tell you otherwise, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. He nodded, but his expression didn't change. Got it, boss. That night, I couldn't sleep. My gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right, but but I couldn't put my finger on it. Aiden was smart, smarter than I'd expected, and he was playing his cards carefully. The problem was, I wasn't sure what game he was playing yet. By the end of the first month, Aiden was no longer just learning the ropes. He was positioning himself as a key player, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. The question was, how far would he go? As much as I wanted to kick him out and call it a day, I couldn't. Family loyalty, or maybe guilt, was keeping me tethered to this sinking ship. Little did I know, the storm brewing on the horizon was far worse than I could have imagined. The unease Aiden stirred in me only grew as the weeks went by. On the surface, everything seemed fine, better than fine, even. My employees were laughing at his jokes in the break room, his ideas were gaining traction, and even Lucas admitted some of Aiden's workflow tweaks were working. But it felt wrong. Forced. Like he was putting on a show, and everyone was buying tickets. One morning, Grace stopped by my office. She hovered in the doorway, shifting awkwardly. "Got a minute?" "Of course," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "What's up?" She hesitated before finally blurting, "It's about Aiden. He's been, well, asking a lot of questions about the team. Who reports to who, what everyone's responsibilities are. Stuff that doesn't really seem like his business." I leaned back in my chair, my stomach tightening. "Did he say why?" She shook her head. "He made it sound casual, like he just wanted to understand how the company runs. But it's weird, right? I mean, he's new, and he's not in management." "It's more than weird," I admitted, my mind racing. "Thanks for letting me know." After Grace left, I started paying closer attention. Aiden was slippery. I'd give him that. He never outright undermined me, but his presence was changing things. Meetings felt different. Employees seemed to be looking to him for answers, even when I was in the room. And the kicker? He was scheduling one-on-one chats with the team, without telling me. I decided to confront him. "Aiden," I said one afternoon, catching him in the hallway, "we need to talk." He gave me that easy smile of his. "Sure thing, boss. What's on your mind? Why are you meeting with my team behind my back?" His smile faltered for a split second before he recovered. "I wasn't going behind your back. I just thought it'd be good to get to know everyone. Build some rapport, you know? Isn't that what you want? A team that works well together?" "That's my job," I said, my voice firmer than I'd intended. "If you have concerns or ideas, bring them to me. But stop playing manager." He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Got it, loud and clear. No harm intended." But there was harm. I could feel it. And the worst part? I didn't know how to stop it without causing a scene. Firing Aiden would blow up the tenuous peace in my family, and I wasn't ready for that fallout. Not yet. A week later, Lucas called me into his office. "We need to talk about Aiden," he said, shutting the door behind me. My stomach dropped. "What about him?" Lucas sat down, his expression grim. "He approached me yesterday. Said he had some ideas about the company's future. Big ideas." "What kind of ideas?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Lucas hesitated. "He thinks you're too conservative, too cautious. He said the company could grow a lot faster if we took more risks, expanded into new markets. He even suggested a few investors we should reach out to." I stared at him, disbelief mixing with anger. "And you didn't think to tell me this sooner?" "I'm telling you now," Lucas said, his tone defensive. "Look, I didn't agree to anything. I told him he was out of line, but Caleb, he's not just some clueless newbie. He knows what he's talking about. That doesn't give him the right to go behind my back." I snapped. "He's been here for, what, 2 months? He has no authority." "I know that," Lucas said, his voice low. "But Caleb, you need to keep an eye on him. He's not here to play second fiddle." I left Lucas's office fuming. Aiden's behavior wasn't just inappropriate, it was dangerous. He was smart enough to know what he was doing, and that meant his actions weren't accidental. They were calculated. That night, I vented to Olivia. She listened quietly, her brow furrowed in concern. "You need to shut this down, Caleb. Talk to your parents if you have to. They can't expect you to keep him on if he's sabotaging you." "I can't prove anything," I said, frustrated. "And even if I could, Mom would just guilt me into giving him another chance. She's blind when it comes to him." Olivia leaned forward, her expression serious. Then you need to outmaneuver him. If he's playing a game, play it better. Easier said than done, I thought. But she was right. Waiting for Aiden to screw up wasn't going to work. I needed to figure out what he was planning and stop him before he could do any more damage. The next day, I asked Noah to grab a drink after work. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. Noah had a knack for spotting red flags, and he wasn't afraid to call things out. Your cousin's trouble, he said bluntly after I'd filled him in. You've got to get ahead of this before he pulls the rug out from under you. How? I asked, frustrated. He's not stupid. He knows how to cover his tracks. Noah smirked. Everyone has a weak spot. You just have to find his. As I drove home that night, Noah's words echoed in my mind. Aiden was playing a long game, but so could I. The problem was, I had no idea what his next move would be, or how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized I might not like the answers. The following weeks felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of sharks. Every day, Aiden found new ways to needle his influence into the company. On the surface, he was still the eager-to-please cousin trying to learn the ropes, but underneath that facade, I could see the cracks widening. My team was starting to trust him, even defer to him in ways that chipped away at my authority. It wasn't blatant enough to call out without sounding paranoid, but it was there. Little comments, subtle power shifts. Noah, true to his word, started digging. He called one night with an update. Caleb, I found something you'll want to hear. It's not a smoking gun, but it's shady as hell. What is it? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. Your cousin's been reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Some of them work for your competitors, others are investors you've been trying to court. He's framing it like he's part of the leadership team. I sat back, stunned. Are you serious? Dead serious, Noah said. He's not outright lying, but he's walking a fine line. Makes it sound like he's spearheading projects and driving the company's vision. I even found a couple of messages where he called himself a strategic advisor. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Aiden wasn't just angling for influence within the company. He was positioning himself as a key player outside of it, too. Thanks, Noah, I said, my voice tight. I'll handle it. Would I, though? That was the question gnawing at me. How do you handle someone who's both family and a saboteur? My parents would never forgive me if I fired him outright, and even if they did, Aiden had already dug his claws deep into the company. Cutting him loose wouldn't undo the damage. I confided in Olivia again that night. She listened patiently as I vented, her green eyes focused and intense. You need to call him out, Caleb, she said firmly. Don't wait for more proof. You have enough to confront him. What if he denies it? Or worse, what if he twists it and makes me look paranoid? The team already likes him more than they should. Then stop playing defense, she said, leaning forward. You're letting him control the narrative. Take it back. Her words stuck with me the next day as I watched Aiden glide through the office, smiling and chatting like he owned the place. I'd let him take too much ground already, and if I didn't push back soon, there wouldn't be anything left to save. I waited until the office had mostly cleared out for the day before pulling him aside. We need to talk, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Sure thing, he said, flashing his usual smile. What's up? In my office.
Now.
He followed me in, closing the door behind him. I didn't sit, and neither did he. I've been hearing things, I began, about you reaching out to investors and people at other companies. Care to explain? His expression didn't flicker. I've been networking, he said casually. Isn't that part of the job? Building connections for the company? You're not in leadership, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. You don't have the authority to represent the company that way. Aiden shrugged, his smile unwavering. I wasn't misrepresenting myself. I never said I was making decisions. I just wanted to open doors for you. For us. For us. I repeated, incredulous. Aiden, you've been here for 2 months. This isn't a partnership. You don't get to decide what's best for the company. His smile finally faded, replaced by a look of calm defiance. Maybe I see potential where you don't. You're so focused on playing it safe that you're missing opportunities. My blood boiled. You're out of line, I said, my voice low. Stay in your lane, or there will be consequences. Consequences? He echoed, his tone mocking. Are you seriously threatening me, Caleb? I'm family. You wouldn't even have this company without the support of your parents. You think they'd back you if you pushed me out? The audacity of his words stunned me into silence. For the first time, he dropped the act completely. This wasn't the eager, bumbling cousin my parents thought he was. This was a calculated, ambitious man who'd been planning this move long before he stepped foot in my office. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This is your last warning, Aiden. Keep this up, and I'll have no choice but to let you go. He smirked, the picture of arrogance. We'll see about that. He left my office, leaving me seething and more uncertain than ever. I'd drawn a line in the sand, but I wasn't sure I had the power to enforce it. And worse, I wasn't sure Aiden believed I did. The tension between us only grew in the days that followed. Aiden kept his head down for a while, but I could feel the undercurrent of his defiance in every interaction. Grace, Lucas, and a few others started to notice the shift, though they didn't say anything outright. I was losing control of my own company, and the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. Noah called again a few days later with another update. Caleb, I did some more digging. Aiden's been in contact with a couple of your parents' old friends, people with money. He's pitching them ideas for revitalizing the company. Sound familiar? My heart sank. He's going to my parents for funding? Not directly, Noah said, but he's laying the groundwork. My guess? He's trying to build a coalition to push you out. I sat in stunned silence, the pieces clicking into place. Aiden wasn't just angling for influence. He was staging a coup. And if he was involving my parents, that meant they were either unwitting pawns in his game or willing participants. I called Olivia that night, my hands shaking as I explained what Noah had found. This is it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He's going for the jugular. Then you need to stop him, Olivia said, her voice firm. Talk to your parents. Show them what he's doing. They won't believe me, I said bitterly. Mom's blinded by guilt, and Dad won't want to admit he made a mistake. Then show them proof, she said. If they won't believe you, make them believe the evidence. It was sound advice, but the idea of confronting my parents filled me with dread. They'd always been my biggest supporters, and the thought of turning them against Aiden felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I could uncross. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized I didn't have a choice. Aiden had declared war, and if I didn't fight back, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. The next morning, I called Noah and Olivia. I need your help, I said. It's time to take Aiden down. Their responses were immediate and unwavering. Whatever you need, Noah said. We've got your back, Olivia added. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Aiden might have been playing a long game, but he wasn't the only one with moves to make. It was time to turn the tide. The plan to confront my parents weighed heavily on me. My relationship with them had always been solid, but this situation with Aiden felt like a wrecking ball swinging straight at the foundation of our family. Still, I couldn't let their loyalty to Aiden blind them to what was happening. It was time for honesty, no matter the fallout. I met with them over dinner at their house that weekend. Mom, of course, had prepared enough food to feed a small army. As we sat down to eat, I realized just how carefully I needed to tread. So, Caleb, my mom said brightly, how's Aiden settling in? He mentioned he's been working on some exciting projects. I almost choked on my water. Exciting projects? I echoed, trying to keep my tone light. He's so enthusiastic, she continued. He told me he's been helping you come up with some ideas to grow the company. Isn't that wonderful? I set down my fork, my appetite gone. Mom, we need to talk about Aiden. There are some things you don't know. Her face fell, and Dad leaned back in his chair, frowning. What's this about Caleb? He asked, his tone guarded. I took a deep breath. Aiden's not just working to help the company. He's positioning himself to take over. He's been meeting with my employees behind my back, pitching investors, and framing it as if he's already in charge. He's even been contacting people you know, Dad, to build support for his ideas. Mom's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Caleb, that doesn't sound like Aiden. Are you sure you're not misinterpreting things? He's been so grateful for this opportunity. Grateful? I said, my voice rising. Grateful people don't undermine their bosses and pitch hostile takeovers. This isn't about helping me. It's about replacing me. Caleb, Dad said, his tone warning, be careful with what you're accusing him of.
Aiden's family.
That doesn't mean he gets a free pass to destroy what I've built. I snapped, unable to hold back my frustration any longer. I'm telling you, he's using your trust in him to justify actions that will hurt all of us. Mom shook her head, her hands twisting in her lap. He's had such a hard time, Caleb. He just wants to prove himself. Maybe he's overstepped, but I'm sure he didn't mean any harm. I opened my laptop and pulled up the files Noah had helped me gather. Look at this, I said, sliding it across the table. Messages to investors, conversations with my team, and even his pitches to your friends. This isn't accidental. He knows exactly what he's doing. They stared at the screen in silence. Dad's face darkened as he scrolled through the evidence, while Mom covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling up in her eyes. This can't be right, she whispered. Aiden wouldn't. He wouldn't do this. I didn't want to believe it either, I said softly, but it's all here. He's playing the long game, and he's using all of us to do it. Dad finally looked up, his jaw tight. We'll talk to him. That's not enough, I said firmly. He needs to be out of the company.
Now.
Mom's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Caleb, no. He's your cousin. If you fire him, it'll tear this family apart. And if I don't, I'll lose everything I've worked for, I countered. I can't prioritize family loyalty over the company. Let us handle it, Dad said, his tone brooking no argument. Aiden listens to us. We'll make him see reason. I wanted to argue, but the tension in the room was palpable. For now, I had to trust that they'd confront him and rein him in. The next day, I braced myself for the fallout. Aiden showed up to the office acting as if nothing had happened. No accusatory texts or icy stares, just his usual overconfident smile. It didn't take long to confirm my worst fears. My parents had confronted him, but he'd spun the narrative in his favor. That afternoon, Dad called me. Caleb, he began, his voice weary. We spoke to Aiden. He admitted he's been a little overzealous, but said it's because he's trying to help you. He promised to back off. I pinched the bridge of my nose, barely restraining my frustration. And you believed him? What choice do we have? He said, exasperated. Do you want us to disown him over a misunderstanding? It's not a misunderstanding. I snapped. He's manipulating you. Dad sighed heavily. You're too close to this, Caleb. Take a step back and try to see his intentions in a better light. I hung up, seething. Aiden had managed to gaslight my parents into believing he was the victim. If I didn't act soon, he'd have the entire company, and possibly my family, wrapped around his finger. That night, I met with Noah, Olivia, and Grace. We sat around my kitchen table, poring over everything I had on Aiden. We need to make a move, I said. Something that forces his hand. What about the board? Grace suggested. If you present this to them, they can vote to remove him. The board's too small, I said, shaking my head. Lucas is the only other voting member, and Aiden's been working on him. I can't risk it. Then you need to catch him in the act, Noah said. Something he can't explain away. He's careful, but he's bound to slip up. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. Over the next week, we watched Aiden like hawks. Noah tapped into his network to monitor Aiden's contacts, while Grace kept tabs on his interactions with the team. Olivia, ever resourceful, began drafting a contingency plan for damage control if Aiden made a public play for the company. The break came when Grace overheard a conversation between Aiden and Lucas. She rushed into my office, her face pale. "You're not going to believe this," she said, closing the door behind her. "Aiden's trying to convince Lucas to stage a shareholder meeting. He wants to present a proposal to restructure leadership, with him at the top." My stomach dropped.
When?
"Next week," she said. "But he's meeting with Lucas again tomorrow to finalize the pitch." This was it, the opportunity I'd been waiting for. If I could catch Aiden in the act, I could not only stop his plan, but expose him to everyone who'd fallen for his charm. The next evening, Noah and I waited in the parking lot as Aiden and Lucas met in a nearby cafe. Noah had planted a recording device at the table earlier that day, and we listened in through his laptop. What Caleb doesn't understand, Aiden was saying, his voice smooth and confident, is that this company needs a leader who's willing to take risks. He's holding us back. If we bring the investors on board with this new structure, we'll have the capital to scale tenfold. It's a win for everyone. And Caleb? Lucas asked, sounding skeptical. What happens to him? Aiden chuckled. He can stay on as a figurehead if he wants. But the real decisions will be ours. I clenched my fists, anger surging through me. This was all the proof I needed. When the meeting ended, we followed Aiden back to his car and confronted him. You're done, I said, stepping into his path. He froze, then smiled. Caleb, what a surprise. Out for a late-night stroll? Save it, I snapped. I know everything. The meetings, the investors, the shareholder proposal. It's over. His smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. You don't have the guts to do anything about it. I held up Noah's laptop, where the recording was still playing. I don't need guts. I have proof. For the first time, Aiden looked rattled. This won't hold up, he said, his voice tight. You'll destroy the company airing this out. No, I said, stepping closer. You've already done that. Now it's my turn to fix it. As he stared at me, I saw the mask slip completely. There was no charm left, just raw, seething hatred. He turned and walked away without another word. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The recording was the ace I needed to secure my position, but I knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. Aiden was cunning, and I couldn't underestimate his ability to spin the narrative in his favor. I needed to not only expose him but also ensure he couldn't claw his way back into the company, or my family's good graces. The morning after our confrontation, I called an emergency meeting with Lucas, Grace, and Olivia. I played the recording for them, watching Lucas's face darken as Aiden's words filled the room. I can't believe this, Lucas muttered when it ended. I thought he was just ambitious. I didn't realize he was gunning for a hostile takeover. Well, now you know, I said. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Lucas looked at me, his jaw tight. We'll need to call a shareholder meeting. If we present this to them, they'll back you. No one wants a leader they can't trust. It's not just about the shareholders, I said. We need to neutralize Aiden completely. If we let him spin this, he'll make me look like the bad guy. Grace, ever pragmatic, leaned forward. We'll need a public statement. Something that addresses this without making the company look unstable. I've already started drafting one, Olivia said, pulling out her laptop. It focuses on transparency and trust, framing Caleb as the one taking decisive action to protect the company. Good, I said, but we need to be ready for his next move. He won't go quietly. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Grace worked with the HR team to compile documentation of Aiden's inappropriate behavior, including his unauthorized meetings and misuse of company resources. Olivia fine-tuned the public statement, ensuring it struck the right balance of strength and professionalism. Lucas reached out to key investors and board members, briefing them on the situation and securing their support. Meanwhile, Noah and I set a trap. Aiden had scheduled another meeting with an investor, a move he clearly thought was still under the radar. We coordinated with the investor, a sharp businessman named Eric who had no patience for manipulation, and recorded their interaction. True to form, Aiden framed himself as the visionary leader behind the company's recent successes, conveniently omitting his actual role. By the end of the week, we had everything we needed. The shareholder meeting was tense, with Aiden strolling in as if he owned the place. He gave me a smug smile as he took his seat, clearly confident he still had the upper hand. But when I played the recordings and presented the evidence, his expression quickly turned sour. This is a setup, he said, standing abruptly. Caleb's trying to make me look bad because he knows I'm right about the company's direction. Is that so? Lucas said, his voice cold. Then why did you lie to me, Aiden? Why did you tell investors Caleb was stepping down when he wasn't? Aiden faltered, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for a response. The shareholders weren't buying his act anymore. The evidence was too damning, and his charm wasn't enough to save him. When the meeting ended, Aiden was officially ousted. The board voted unanimously to terminate his employment and barred him from holding any future position within the company. It was a decisive victory, but the fallout wasn't over. Later that evening, I met with my parents to break the news. Mom was devastated, her face pale and tear-streaked as I recounted what had happened. Dad sat in stony silence, his hands clenched into fists. "How could you do this to him?" Mom finally asked, her voice trembling. "He's your cousin, Caleb. Your family." "No, Mom," I said softly. "Family doesn't do what Aiden did. He wasn't just trying to take the company. He was trying to destroy me. I had to stop him." Dad finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "We trusted him. We thought he was trying to help. He used that trust against you," I said. "I didn't want this, but he gave me no choice." The room fell silent. I could see the pain in their eyes, the realization that Aiden wasn't the person they thought he was. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was the truth. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle. Aiden disappeared from our lives, leaving behind a mess that took time to clean up. The company rallied behind me, reassured by my transparency and commitment to protecting what we'd built. Investors expressed their support, and the team began to feel like a team again. But the experience left its mark. I was more guarded now, more wary of letting anyone too close. Olivia, ever the optimist, tried to remind me that not everyone was like Aiden, but the scars ran deep. Trust was something I couldn't afford to give away so easily anymore. One evening, as I sat in my office going over the latest quarterly reports, Noah stopped by. He leaned against the doorframe, a faint smile on his face. "You did it," he said. "You stopped him." "Barely," I said with a wry chuckle. "If it weren't for you, Grace, and Olivia, he might have gotten away with it." "Yeah, but he didn't," Noah said. "And now you're stronger for it." Stronger. It was a nice thought, but the road to rebuilding wasn't an easy one. Still, as I looked around at the company I'd fought so hard to protect, I knew it had been worth it. Aiden had tried to tear me down, but in the end, he'd only made me more determined. Family could be a double-edged sword, but this time, I'd survive the cut. And I wasn't about to let anyone else take what I'd worked for. Not now, not ever.